Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Exploring Glorantha on the Iconic Production channel. We're releasing this a week early to our patrons. You actually get to be a part of the conversation if you're on chat right now, and then it'll go live on YouTube in about a week for everyone else. I am JM. You probably know me from the Iconic Podcast, the stream games that we do for Ulysses. With me today is Evan. Actually, he'll be with me all the time because we are the hosts of Exploring Glorantha. Evan, thanks for being willing to do this and joining me on this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for inviting me, JM.
Oh, always. So let's start with just a brief introduction of who we are and why we're doing this. So, Evan, do you want to kind of tell our viewers and our listeners who you are, why, what you love about gaming, that sort of thing?
Absolutely. I, from a young age, was introduced to the fantasy side of imagination by my mom. The Greek myths and Tolkien. She read the Hobbit to me. Arthurian stories. Those just were started me on the path. My mom was from fantasy. My dad was from science fiction, but we're not talking about that today.
Not today.
And then I got introduced to gaming in the late 70s, about 1978 or so. Dungeons and Dragons was my gateway into that. And then in high school, a friend of mine introduced me to RuneQuest and Glorantha. And about 1982, I think later that year or early the next, one of the things I received for my birthday was Troll Pack, which is one of the most amazing Chaosium products of that era. I was firmly hooked, read it cover to cover many times. And so Glorantha and RuneQuest and other games exploring Glorantha have been in the mix ever since. I ran a 2-year campaign in college, the Borderlands campaign, and on into Griffin Mountain. And I just love everything about this setting. I have a little academic hook in that my background is in anthropology, although I ended up in law. And I have tried to pass this on to the next generation. My son is a big gamer. My daughter is more of a secret nerd, but she got more of the Doctor Who and other things. But all in all, it's been great. And now I get to be on a video stream talking about one of the greatest fantasy creations ever, Glorantha.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about why it's so great. So hopefully, like, the goal of this podcast is just to share our love of Glorantha with people. And sometimes Glorantha can feel really intimidating to get into. And we'll talk about that a little today. But the goal of this is to say, hey, if you're interested, here's why it's cool, and here's how to get into it. And we're going to just kind of take small steps of ever-widening circles talking about Glorantha. Myself, I got introduced to role-playing in middle school through a series of unfortunate events that then led me to go, I think I can do this. GURPS and Palladium were first, but I found this book at my local game store called Cults of Terror, and it was a book of the chaos gods for RuneQuest, and I had no clue what was going on there, but it forever altered the trajectory of my gaming. And
now we know what hurt you when you were a child.
That's right. This is why I continue to share the chaotic things that infest my mind and soul. And I'm passing my love of Glorantha on to my son as well, mainly through. Let me see if I can do this right. Other hand. Nope, this hand. Right there, through God's War. And we're going to talk about that. My son loves playing God's War with me. He corrects me often on myths if I don't get them correctly. So, again, this show, Exploring Glorantha, is just going to be us talking to you about Glorantha, telling you why we love it, and trying to kind of guide people into understanding the setting. Because the setting has been around for almost 50 years now. And It's a setting that has been continually refined and deepened and explored and widened, and it is, when you come to fantasy gaming in general, whether it's Dungeons and Dragons or Pathfinder or sort of your typical fantasy games, you have a lot of touchstones that you understand. You may not have played Dungeons and Dragons, but if you've read The Wheel of Time, if you've read Lord of the Rings, you kind of have these touchstones. You don't necessarily have those in Glorantha, except for, we'll talk something a little bit later that I recently discovered. It is a mythical setting as opposed to really a fantasy setting. And so, Evan, we're going to talk about what is Glorantha, why is it worth investing in? Do you want to? You pulled a quote from the Guide to Glorantha. Do you want to share that with us?
Absolutely. So this is the description of Glorantha, and I think it helps you really understand its difference. And this is from the Guide to Glorantha, Volume 1.
That's right.
Glorantha is a magical world, not a planet floating in space. Its universe obeys other laws than those of terrestrial physics. The inner world, the world of mortals, is shaped like a huge cube of Earth, floating in a limitless sea of water. Two major continents, Genertella and Pomaltella, and a myriad of minor islands rise above the surface of the infinite sea. The sky world lies beyond the dome of the sky. At night, the stars show where the magical denizens of the sky world peep through the sky dome to guard their followers below. Similarly, the underworld is populated by immortal creatures, as well as by evil dreams, and by the souls of the dead and unborn. The sun rises from the east each morning, then passes over the air and across the sky to set each evening in the west. It then travels beneath the seas and the earth through the underworld, and finally again up to the eastern lands of the dawn. The world is populated by magical entities who personify fundamental powers and cosmic truths, spirits of diverse origin, power, and benevolence, and feared manifestations of chaos, foul-seeming and otherwise. Many of these beings are alive in every sense, but many are not. Most people live only in the mundane world, content to let priests, shamans, and wizards protect them. But the influence of the magical world is always there.
Yeah. By the way, if I ever win the lottery, I'm just going to pay you to do an audio reading of the Guide to Glorantha because that was awesome.
I will take that money.
There you go. So it's heroic Bronze Age gaming. If any of this sounds familiar, it's because it's the way the ancient world viewed our world. And Greg Stafford is less of a game designer and more of a shaman who guides us through learning about Glorantha. And that may sound really esoteric and really sort of far-fetched, but this was a man who deeply believed in the power of role-playing and deeply believed that the world was magical, right? Everyone in Glorantha has magic. The world of the gods and the god time and the hero quests, which we'll get into in later episodes, these are all fundamental pieces of Glorantha. It is not like other fantasy worlds where only the few have magic. Everyone has magic here because it's the way they interact with just their world. Greg Stafford had a quote that was shared in was it an Escapist magazine article, I believe?
Yes, that's right.
If you don't mind, I'll...
Please.
He said that role-playing activates a critical human process that has been nearly killed by over-rationalization and materialism. Role-playing is a way for humans to interact with our deep, hidden, and mythological selves. Role-playing games are the way to feed our souls. And that's what Glorantha is about. Now, I will say, even if you've never heard of Glorantha, you have heard of its influences. Because if you enjoy the Elder Scrolls computer game series, one of the main designers of Morrowind worked on Oblivion, and then this carries forward into its latest iteration of Skyrim, loved and worked on Glorantha. And as we go through this, I will point out points where, hey, if you liked this about Elder Scrolls, here is your touchstone in Glorantha. For example, in the middle of the main setting that we're going to talk about, Dragon Pass, there is a giant mountain in the center that rises up that everyone in Dragon Pass can see. And on there are people who worship Orlanth and use their breath to create magical effects. And if that is not homaged in Skyrim with the gray voices and the mountain in the center of Skyrim, then I'm doing a poor job of explaining the connections. So, what would you say is kind of the main focus of Glorantha? What we said, heroic Bronze Age fantasy gaming. What does that mean to you, Evan?
Yeah. Well, so it's an influence and an analog to our own Bronze Age, but we shouldn't get too hung up in. It's not a historical recreation. For example, let's think about in our own Bronze Age. Bronze was relatively rare because copper was rare, and you had to mix it with tin and make it. And there's a whole complexity to that, and this influences the way that things exist in Glorantha. But Glorantha is very different because bronze is not a mineral on the periodic table. Bronze is the remains of the bones of the dead gods from the God Wars. And bronze is not rare. Bronze is common. Unlike in our world, iron was common. Iron is rare and magical, as everything in Glorantha is. And so already there, it's, bronze is the closest analogy we have to our world to give us an insight into what is happening in Glorantha. But it's just a sort of a translation for us. Bronze has a different origin. It has a different association. And so although we can take inspiration from things like the Odyssey and the Iliad and other the Epic of Gilgamesh, these ancient touchstones to our own past, it's like an incredible remix. Yes. in Glorantha, and with influences not only from these ancient stories, which have deep meaning for us, but other influences. And in the early iteration of RuneQuest, one of the things that they pointed to were the early stories of the pulps, that Hyboria, the influence of Robert E. Howard in Swords and Sorcery, and Lankmar, the creation of Fritz Leiber, were also things to draw on, and they drew a distinction from the Lord of the Rings, and as is so often said, and we will probably return to many times, Middle Earth, it was a world, a fantasy world created by Tolkien as a philologist and master of languages, and imagining a world for his exploration of language. And Glorantha is a heroic setting of mythology, and Greg Stafford's love and belief in the importance of mythology and the way that it shapes people and their interactions.
Yeah, and kind of something to point out is that in Glorantha, right, in a lot of our fantasy games, we try to use magic almost as science to explain how the world works. In Glorantha, it is all about myths. Why does water flow downhill to the sea? Well, that's because in this one myth, Magasta summoned all of the waters to battle chaos, and so they came from everywhere in the world down to the center and kind of pulled them in. So, by the way, thank you to already. We have a couple of people from our Patreon viewing. Becca, good to see you. I know you love Glorantha. And John, that was a great point. John actually pointed out that the actual Elder Scrolls are an homage because they allow you to travel through time following a script, which is a direct parallel to hero questing, which we're going to do a whole episode on hero questing because that's so important to the foundation of Glorantha. So when Glorantha first came out, it wasn't a role-playing game. The first thing that came out for Glorantha was actually this. It was a war game known as White Bear, Red Moon, and it sort of followed the Hero Wars. Correct me if I'm wrong, Evan. Followed the Hero Wars, the battle between this kingdom of Sartar and the Lunar Empire, and that battle has continued on through role-playing games, through video games, which we're going to talk about, and through board games. And it's interesting to see this first attempt, this first exploration of Glorantha, because when you get White Bear, Red Moon, there's very little reference. You just get thrown these terms. You're dropped into the middle of this world. Mm-hmm. And then Glorantha has touched so many lives. Very early on, Greg was clear that he was exploring Glorantha. He wasn't writing it. Like, he was exploring it. In the same way that, like, Stephen King talks about The Dark Tower, right? Stephen King was just relating the story that was coming to him. But Greg felt it was very important that myths are not something that are created by, in isolation. And so from the very early days, people like Sandy Peterson, who went on to design things like Doom and Quake, and is now running Peterson Games. Sandy Peterson was instrumental in writing Call of Cthulhu. Janelle Jacase was involved. Jonathan Tweet and Rob Hainso are also were involved in it, and then they were able to produce their letter of love to Glorantha here, because so Glorantha is so large. I'm gonna make a transition here a little bit. No matter how you like to game, there's something in Glorantha for you. And Evan and I come from a role-playing background, so we're going to talk a little bit about the role-playing games. If you are familiar with the old GNS theory of role-playing games, right? Gaming, where do you find your joy in gaming? Is it from the narrative? Is it from the simulation? Is it from the game? You've got 3 options. So, Evan, do you want to introduce us to our first one?
Sure. So, one of the 3, and when we're talking about 3 options, we're talking about 3 current live options that are in production that are being supported now. So, one of these is HeroQuest, which was the bones of it were created by visionary game designer Robin Laws, mm-hmm. in coordination with Greg Stafford, and it is very much a narrative story game. It has a more rules light approach, and very much follows a philosophy of creating a fiction and interaction with the world, which was a big step away from sort of the roots where Glorantha started, which we'll talk about next. But it exists in a wonderful parallel. There's no perfect representation of gaming, and there's no in Glorantha, and there's nothing I think that you can do that is wrong. It's as JM said, where do you find your enjoyment in interacting with this unique setting? And HeroQuest offers a very unique and enjoyable setting and rule set to jump in and tell fantastic stories. And you pretty much get everything you need in the one book,
Mm-hmm.
Hero Quest Glorantha.
Yeah, and I've run all three of these games, and Hero Quest it's a very rules light game, but there's enough meat there, and it's really focused on telling the stories. So if you just want to get in and tell stories in Glorantha, this is a great place to start. The one I'm currently running right now is RuneQuest. Um, and RuneQuest was sort of their first version of the game. It was also a response to Dungeons and Dragons, like the early edition of Dungeons and Dragons. It is a heavy skill-based simulationist game. The goal of RuneQuest is to recreate in the rules the feel of the world of Glorantha. Magic is high. There's a lot of it. Combat is deadly, yet healing is plentiful. It is very focused on the fact that one of the big differences in Glorantha, and we'll use D&D as kind of our lingua franca, is in D&D there's always the joke that you're playing, itinerant murder hobos, right? And that's not to say that you can't play adventurers or wanderers in Glorantha, but RuneQuest, the first part of RuneQuest character creation, and all of my players, Becca's in the chat so she can attest to this. The longest part of character creation is rolling on these tables to start to find out who your grandparents were and what deeds did they do, and then who were your parents and what deeds did they do. And what's interesting is going through the history tables at the start, while there are some mechanical benefits. One, you come out of it, even if you've never played anything in Glorantha, you have a good understanding of the last little bit of history. You understand your place in the community, and you understand why your community is so important. So in Glorantha, while you go on adventures, the story of your clan is almost more important than the individual stories of your characters, which is just it's a really neat. You play a little bit freer is kind of what I've seen in the games, because you know that your story will continue, your clan story will continue long after your story has ended. And much like Hero Quest and the game we're going to talk about next, the nice thing about the Glorantha rulebooks is, to start, you get basically everything you need in one book. So the last one is one that's very close to both Evan's and my my heart. This is kind of how Evan and I got into chatting with each other, is because the other podcast I do is the 13th Age iconic podcast, and so the latest one, and this is more on the gaming side, is a D20 version of Glorantha. My biggest hurdle to get people into Glorantha is it's a D100 system. It's very similar to RuneQuest is very similar to Call of Cthulhu, and Rob and Jonathan created this love letter using the 13th Age engine, which allows people who love D20 gaming to have at least a mechanical familiarity with Glorantha going forward. Now, you've played in 13th Age with me. You're writing actually like a lunar sort of supplement to like a fan supplement for this. Why don't you talk about 13th Age Glorantha?
Okay. Yeah, so now you've outed me on that. I can't promise when anyone will ever see that.
At this point, it's just a fan thing that you are doing.
That's right. That's right. I originally pretty much wrote it just for me and JM. So 13th Age Glorantha. So we, most folks in role playing understand the D20 system. It's the engine, the undercarriage for Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder, and so many other things. And 13th Age, of course, adds some really unique features. The idea of customizing your character with one unique thing, and the very broad backgrounds that you can provide. And this really allowed the transfer of this sort of a game that has its origin in original D&D, where RuneQuest, the original role-playing game to play in Glorantha, was sort of written as a reaction and in some ways a critique of the limitations of original D&D. And now we've come full circle, and now we have a descendant of Dungeons and Dragons to play in Glorantha, because the tools that we have to create fascinating characters, and to have the sorts of broad magical and skill-based interactions with the environment and cultures are there in 13th Age, and you can tell how Jonathan and Rob just love the setting, and their love child with Dungeons and Dragons. It perfectly transfers. And the other wonderful thing about 13th Age is how modular that they have made the sort of character system to be able to customize things. And then in 13th Age Glorantha, they showed how you can transform and customize classes to make them really reflect the setting, to give flavor, and to really, just like the character creation in RuneQuest, where by the end of the character creation you have a sense of place and a rootedness in the setting. These new sort of remixed classes called transformation classes in 13th Age Glorantha also point you down that path wonderfully.
Yeah, and it's actually some of the best mechanical design that I've seen in gaming in recent memory. The fact that they're able to take these great mythological concepts from the game, like the Earth Priestess, and translate them into a mechanical class to play. If you're at all interested, you can check out the Iconic podcast. We talk about the 13th Age Glorantha classes. We've got a couple of episodes on 13th Age Glorantha. You can go check that out on our feed. But why do we love Glorantha? I am a huge fan of ancient Near East mythology. I'm a huge fan of mythology, of Joseph Campbell. All of these things feed directly into Glorantha. It is about community. It is about mythology. It is about exploring the myths that bind us together, which sounds very highfalutin. So in game terms, what you do a lot of the same things that you do in other RPGs. You go out and you fight monsters. You save people. You defend your ancestral land. But you do this all with a sight on how it affects the community at large. When we get into our next episode, which is probably going to be on the Kingdom of Sartar as kind of a starting place, we'll get a little bit deeper into that. But there's this interaction with the magical world in all three games that works a little differently than it does kind of in traditional fantasy, because heroes, which is what you were playing, routinely go in and reenact the myths of their cultures in order to reinforce reality, to stabilize things, to gain gifts from the gods by enacting their roles and then stepping back into the world. So, for example, imagine you're playing in a Old Norse game, like where you're playing, in a Viking setting, where one of your quests would be to reenact Thor drinking the fountain, or the horn that is connected to the ocean. And in doing so, you gain some of Thor's aspects when you come back, and you're reinforcing the fact that Thor fought off the giants and kind of kept them away from breaking into your reality, whether that's cosmic or very local. And you are ensuring that your group can survive the oncoming giant onslaught. So there is this relationship with the stories of the past and the present that just keeps revolving in Glorantha. Now, Evan, you said that it's fantasy off the beaten path. You want to explain that just a little bit?
Sure. So the there are uh, things that we sort of have come to expect from regular fantasy, or the things that we normally find in our in the reading section in the library or the bookstore from our fantasy movies that um, very much go back to Tolkien, but are influenced by lots of pop culture things. And
Mm-hmm.
Greg Stafford and his collaborators have really rewritten the sort of starting script. For one thing, the universe, as was stated in the opening, the universe doesn't behave because of physics and
Mm-hmm.
chemistry in Glorantha. The world operates because of the runes. RuneQuest is not just a cool name. The runes are fundamental to the existence of reality in Glorantha. These are cosmic principles that define the operation of the universe, the properties of the gods, the spirits, and magic, and the relationship of human beings both to the metaphysical world and to one another, and the physical world. So people have, instead of genetics, you have links to runes. Your family might be strong in the life rune. You are someone who is a bringer of community and fertility and prosperity, or maybe you are tied to the death rune. Now, this doesn't mean that you are necessarily a serial killer. I mean, you could be a very honorable warrior, someone who guards the barriers between life and death, and that strong break that has to exist in the cycle of mortal life is incredibly important. And so death could be a combat thing, but it could also be a very deeply spiritual thing. The connection between transitioning someone from the living to the world of the dead, which is just a continuity. Death is not the end. Your ancestors and your fellow human beings who live with you in life, they pass on
Mm-hmm.
to the next world, and so your interaction with them, and so the runes help define that. And every god and spirit may be tied to particular runes. Every creature or human being could be, and so this sort of changes our focus. And as we said, then it leads into this idea of pervasive magic, of everyone uses their own magic and relationship with the metaphysical world in order to interact. And so that's very different than, I think, our experience of fantasy.
Yeah, and you get this competing truths that you talk about. There are
Yeah.
many different tribes, and they have many different myths, and they have many different ways of viewing the world. And what's interesting is there's no one way. Like during one of the ages of Glorantha, the God learners tried to make this monomyth, which I find funny that he's so incredibly influenced by Campbell, yet he sort of understands that Campbell's monomyth doesn't actually work. If all you have is the monomyth, every problem is a nail, because it doesn't. You have to hammer myths into place. So Greg Stafford, kind of understanding the world, he gives us competing truths. He gives us competing worldviews. There is no one continuous thread. There are all of these multiple stories that sort of, when you step back and take them in view, presents a tapestry of history, but not like a continuous story. Additionally, there are unique fantasy races. You'll find names that are familiar. So you'll find creatures like the elves, but the elves in Glorantha are living trees. You'll find the dwarves. And what's interesting about the dwarves is the dwarves are a crafted or made race. They cast themselves. And again, if you are a fan of like the Elder Scrolls, right? The dwarves have disappeared in the Elder Scrolls, but they have left behind these machines, and there are these references to them being creatures of earth or maybe creatures of stone. Well, in Gloranthan history, the dwarves are called the Mostali. That's what they call themselves. And they are trying to rebuild the great god Mostal in order to cause him to come back, essentially, from the dead. And so they build these machines, they build these complex things underground, to kind of recreate their god. There's also the trolls. Now, you read Troll Pack, so why don't you give us a brief overview of the trolls?
Sure. So the trolls. The trolls of Glorantha are not like anything you've encountered before, and they have this, this associational name as that is, monstrous. But the trolls are so much more than that. The trolls are beings of darkness, and they were first awakened in the underworld, what many people would consider hell, which was their paradise. It was dark. There were many things to eat, and then they were driven to the surface world for mythological reasons, and they considered hell their paradise was called Wonderhome, and they followed their gods, their darkness gods, who are very matriarchal, to the surface world, where at least there were plenty of things to eat. And trolls are, their overwhelming drive is for family and for eating stuff. And they are just incredible. The idea that they're, and they have a long and tragic history. They have a difficult relationship with elves and dwarves. They prefer to eat elves and dwarves because they're delicious, but sometimes they also form alliances with them. Human beings as well. Human beings are also delicious, but sometimes they're very useful for things other than food. And so while they're, you could be fighting trolls as enemies, they could be your allies. And the thing that they hate the most above any other enemy is chaos, which is the world destroyer. And they're some of the greatest fighters of chaos. And so they're not one-dimensional. They are multi-dimensional, and sometimes you very much want them to be on your side, and sometimes you want to be anywhere that they are not, because they can be terrifying. And this is just the unique genius of these different approaches to creatures in Glorantha.
So, where do we go ahead and learn about this? There are a number of places. There are a number of places to learn about Glorantha, and I apologize. I'm experiencing a little technical difficulty, but we're just. Oh, Streamlabs crashed.
Uh-oh.
All right, so let me see if I can't log. Let's see if that worked. What's our All right, so where to learn about it. Evan, why don't you talk about the video games that are available?
Absolutely. So there are two amazing video games, not like anything else that you may have played. They are story-oriented, but they're like playing Civilization with incredible static artwork, where you are trying to build up your community and build up your standing in your area. The first one was King of Dragon Pass, which was a revolutionary game when it was created, I think, over 20 years ago. But it's been reinvented and come back out as a mobile platform game. You can play it on your iPad, your phone, etc. And it is in part sort of a choose your own adventure, and in part a resource management game. And the setting for King of Dragon Pass is after a catastrophic event known as the Dragon Kill War, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But the short thing is the dragons were the ones doing the killing, and they wiped out all of humanity in Dragon Pass. And so for a long time, it was not settled. And then eventually, people got brave enough or desperate enough to return to this dangerous magical place and start to resettle it. And so you start as running the leadership of a particular clan of barbarians who have settled in the mountains and hills of Sartar, and who are trying to struggle to survive by developing their trade connections, by developing their alliances, by growing their herds of cattle and sheep, and eventually to influence the course of development of society within Dragon Pass, and ultimately to perhaps produce the king of Dragon Pass. The spiritual successor of King of Dragon Pass is a game called Six Ages, and this is set at a different time. It is set before history, before the time of what is called the Great Compromise, which is another thing that we'll discuss. But the Great Compromise ended the Gods' War. So this is set during the Gods' War. The war is going on between the cosmic forces and the struggle for supremacy over reality. And you are have a small human clan that has fled from the heart of the Gods' War and is trying to reestablish itself. But rather than being the hill folk barbarians of Sartar, instead you are a group of what is called riders. You are people who know the secret of riding horses. And your rivals are the people who ride chariots, and also some of the people from the mountains, the storm folk. And again, you are trying to engage with the myths and the gods, magic, the terrain, and your fellow communities in order to survive, in order to find and invent new ways of being within the world. And Six Ages, Ride Like the Wind is the first chapter, and they're working on a second one called Lights Go Out, which is just as bad as it sounds, because in the Gods' War it became very dark. So those are two great ways that you can, just on your own, start to learn about the settings. They're not that expensive in terms of...
they're on Steam and they're on iOS, and I think at least, I know King of Dragon Pass is available on Android as well.
Yeah, and hours of replayability.
Mm-hmm. Now, if you don't enjoy video games, but you enjoy novels, The King of Sartar is a great way to get in to Glorantha as well. You can get this I believe you can get it on Chaosium, both as a PDF, other electronic formats, and as a physical format. And it is not a novel in the way that you may expect. If you have read academic textbooks, this is the best way to explain it. It is Greg Stafford as an anthropologist kind of assembling stories and trying to put in order some of the stories of Glorantha. And he puts like academic footnotes from other fictional scholars that he has created. But it gives you a good view of at least the Sartarite view from the beginning of the world through the Hero Wars, which is sort of the end of the Third Age. I've read through it a number of times. It's a great source of enjoyment. It's a unique... it's not a novel in the fact that it is not a novel. It is a collection of stories that kind of go forward from there. Any of the game books that we referenced, they're all going to provide you a great introduction to the world. They have the world's materials in there. They have the like the history of the God's War, the God Time, the history of the area you're looking at. Another great resource is the Prince of Sartar. Do you want to give us a little overview of that? And we're going to put
Sure.
links to all of this in the YouTube notes.
Definitely. So Prince of Sartar is a webcomic. It is unfortunately on hiatus, and the only thing that I would ever caution people about is that it ends in the middle of the latest story because of the author is now also the creative lead for Chaosium on Glorantha and one of the principal directors of that company. And suddenly things just got too busy to also be writing a webcomic on the side. However, the stories that are completed are phenomenal. It is telling the story, again, of the Third Age, of the lead up to the conflicts known as the Hero Wars, and in particular, the battle between a hero named Argrath and the Lunar Empire, which is the sort of main powerhouse polity in this part of the world. You can think of them as the Persian Empire or the Roman Empire, sort of remixed together, expansive, visionary, but also rapacious in its desire for conquest. And so each story arc leads you through and introduces you to different important characters from this period of Gloranthan history, and the visuals of it really transport you into this amazing and in some ways familiar and in some ways entirely alien world. And so I can definitely highly recommend it.
Now, if you like board games and you have money to spend, the ones that I'm pointing to right now on my screen, the God's War is a great way to learn about Glorantha. It is set during this thing that we keep talking about, the God Time, and we'll explain that. That's probably going to be our next episode, just sort of explaining the mythology as best as we can. We're going to start with the Sartarite view, but in the God's War, you have all of the pantheons, or that kind of revolve in and around Dragon Pass. So you have the Earth, the pantheon, the of like Ernalda and the priestess of Earth. You have Storm, which is the main pantheon for game set in Dragon Pass. You have the Lunar Empire. You have the Sea. You have Darkness, and you have Chaos. And you are playing through, not through where you would actually play a game in the role-playing game, but you are playing through the mythological time, the three main eras of the God Time, as these pantheons rise and clash and battle chaos together and still try to fight for supremacy. And so it really leans into that idea that there are these competing mythologies, there are these competing pantheons. And again, much like 13th Age Glorantha, there is amazing game design in God's War. There's just an amazing amount of detail of, hey, these powers work this way because this is the way the myths work. Now, if you're just a person who likes me, who's like me, if you like me, thank you, I appreciate that. But if you are a person like me, check out the Gloranthan source book. I know that Phantom of Truth, you've got the you posted this on, there it is. On your Twitter, because Chaosium was retweeting this. This is a source book that is system neutral. This is just the lore of Glorantha for starting a game. So if you have your own pet system that you enjoy running in, this is all you would need to run it. And I think one of the most important things about Glorantha is there's two interchangeable acronyms that have been part of the game since it was developed. And it's, hey, your Glorantha may vary, or your Glorantha will vary. At its core, Greg Stafford and all of the people of Moon Design who are now at Chaosium, they want you to take this game and make it your own. Yes, there's canon, but much like the myths that make up the world, canon is really sort of a fluid thing. So they're saying, here's the source book, Do with it what you will. And then if you are a muscular gamer and feel like carrying around, I don't know, 45 pounds of Glorantha lore, it may not be that much, but these books are available, and it is the Guide to Glorantha. These are coffee table level gorgeous books, full of art, full of lore, one of the most incredible indexes I've ever seen. It is again system neutral. But if the Guide to Glorantha is your quick and easy taste of Glorantha, the Guide to Glorantha is your master's level textbook for understanding this world. And every page is full of plot hooks and plot ideas and interesting world lore. Evan, I mean, you've read through at least parts of it.
Yeah. Yes. No, it's every entry has multiple potential scenario hooks in it. Not only do the descriptions of every city, major settlement, ruin, as well as ruins, all point you towards, hey, here's something really cool that you could do. And a lot of things are offered, but there's no there's no explanation. There could be 5, 6, 12 different reasons that something is the way it is, but the way that it hooks into the setting, you can take that and run with it. There are some entries that you could design a whole campaign around. And even though we're going to talk about the sort of default setting for Sartorites, and there's a lot of deep background for that. But if you don't want to be tied to that, and you just want to look at some entries from the guide, there is so much that you could construct your own vision of Glorantha around, and it would be amazing. Mm-hmm. And your Glorantha will vary, but it will be amazing.
Right, and embrace that, like lean into it. So, what can you expect from exploring Glorantha? Well, a lot more of this. Evan and I talking, interacting with you guys in the chat. We're going to post a lot of polls on our Patreon to say, hey, what do you guys want to really see next? We have ideas of exploring, like walking you through the God time and explaining why it's important. I think what I'd love to do, though, is start with something a little bit more personal and say, hey, our next episode is going to be on where and how do I start a game of Glorantha. But we're going to talk about Dragon Pass. We're going to talk about Prax and Griffin Mountain and the ducks. There are ducks in Glorantha, and they're way cooler than just tossing, like what I just tossed out, that there are ducks. There are these anthropomorphic not drugs. Wow, I just lost the thread of my thought. There are humanoid ducks, and they worship the death god. So they are not necessarily comical. They are scary, and I love them. We're going to talk about chaos and why it is not disorder and why most people in the world find it terrifying. And then, if we're still doing this and you have any interest, we will delve into the Lunar Empire, both as enemies of the Sartorites of your game, or possibly as starting your own game in the Lunar Empire. We may touch on other resources. Chaosium has opened up the Johnstown Compendium, where fans can submit and publish Gloranthan material on DriveThruRPG, and there are some great resources there. Two that come to mind are 6 Seasons in Sartar, which is a campaign, and the Rough Guide to Glamour, which if you've been like, hey, these lunars sound pretty cool, go check that one out. But I think that sort of brings us to our, we're looking to do about an hour. So Brian, go check out see the Lunar Fan Supplement soon. I don't know. Evan wrote it for me and him, and it's delightful. I did not mean to put any pressure on you, Evan. I do apologize for that. That was not my
No, that's fine. No, I can imagine, people ever since Jonathan Tweet said he wanted to write a lunar supplement for 13th Age Glorantha, but he's been busy, and now he's doing something else. He's doing Dragon's Eye for
Yes.
Chaosium. So we probably won't see it anytime soon. Yeah, I wrote this stuff for myself. It has not been play tested yet, so
Not yet.
let's at least
soon.
roll a few dice with it, and then we'll see. But it's definitely a fan work, and that maybe my last observation will be that fan interaction and fan development has always been fundamental to Glorantha. There are so many fanzines and fan supplements that were created, and things that happened at conventions. And it used to be that those things were could be very rare. It would be difficult to find, and if you want to acquire those things now, stuff that was written in the 80s or 90s, it's going to cost you a chunk of change on eBay if you can even find them. But now we're in a golden age of sharing things, of fans developing things, and Johnstown Compendium is one of those places. But people just create websites, and they just create supplements, and there are extremely generous fan guidelines by Chaosium and by Pelgrane as well. And so if you're crazy like me and spend 2 years developing your own vision of lunar transformation characters and then want to put those out, it's something that's supported, and it really pushes things forward. The companies can't create all to fill all the demand for exploring this amazing world. And so if our conversations inspire anybody to go out and build up their little corner of Glorantha, and then maybe share it with friends or other fans, our job is done.
Yeah, no, agreed. Really, that's the whole goal of this show. We love Glorantha. We want more people to love Glorantha, and so we're gonna share and we're gonna talk about it. And yeah, Brian, Glamour is fantastic. It's got the Red Emperor as Elvis on the front cover, and is that's interesting, and there's a reason why. But yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to post them on the Patreon. We'll get back to you. We're going to try and do these about once a month, kind of getting art assets and kind of talking about, like, kind of paring it down to, hey, here's really what the core of this is just takes some time and some resources. But we hope you enjoyed this. Leave a message on the YouTube channel. Leave a message on Patreon. If you guys are watching this when it goes live on our YouTube channel, I hope you enjoyed it. We will be checking the chats and the comments. And until next time, thank you for exploring Glorantha with us. If you have any specific questions that you would like to see us address in the show, let us know. We will take it. We'll start the show off with like a little maybe email segment or question and answer segment. And as always, if you're if you're on in the chat, I'm looking at it. John and Brian and Becca, I really appreciate you guys being on here and interacting with us. Evan, thank you so much for joining me on this journey. I know we've been talking about a lot about Glorantha for years, and I'm glad to be sharing this show with you. So,
Likewise.
All right. Well, until next time, have good gaming. Go out, explore Glorantha, and share your stories with us. That's the core of what Glorantha was about. Creating and sharing stories with your friends. And so we will talk with you the next time we talk with you. And check out, if you're interested, the Iconic Podcast has a lot of information on Glorantha. We have talked about 13th Age Glorantha. We've been exploring classes. It keeps coming up in our episodes because one of the hosts loves the setting and keeps tying it back to Glorantha. So with that, I think that's a wrap for this first episode of Exploring Glorantha. Hopefully we'll be able to also have guests. I'm in the process of talking with a couple of people to come on and share their stories and why they love it. And we're just going to keep moving forward with this. So I appreciate that you have all been here, chat. You are the best.